Oh man, I really want to go backpacking. But where? Well, hello. Calvin here. Welcome back to my channel, Everyday Backpacker. As you probably noticed, winter's on its way out. Season's changing. Snow's melting. Things are getting a little bit better out there. And no doubt, if you're anything like me, which you probably are if you're watching this video, that wanderlust is starting to kick in. Starting to look forward to hitting that trail, testing out that new gear. No, I am. But if you're like me, the other question on your mind is, where the hell are we gonna go? Trip planning is at the same time one of the most important and often overdone and misunderstood parts of backpacking. It is equally loved and loathed. Some look at it as the foundation of a trip, while others just think of it as something those other hikers do. So today, being another chilly, kind of rainy day in Montana, and since one of my longtime subscribers put the question to me about trip planning, I thought it'd be a good subject to cover, especially this time of year. And regardless of your feelings, one way or the other, about trip planning, I do believe it's something that we can all take a look at, especially when you think about how most of the guides that are available on backpacking in the books make trip planning sound like you're getting ready to go on a 3-week trip into the Himalayas on an expedition. And the reality is, it doesn't have to be that regimented. Now, everybody has their different techniques and different goals when it comes to backpacking. We all know those people, and we're going to talk about those as well. But I thought I would at least give you some ideas on how I tend to go about with planning, and some of the no-nonsense, straightforward things that I look into when I'm doing my planning. So if you've ever gone out on a backpacking trip, you've done at least some base level of planning, because you have to A, know where you're going, and B, know what you're taking when you go out there. That's a pretty basic set of plans. You've also probably encountered at least somebody along the way that is one of either two extremes in backcountry planning. The first one being the itinerary king. That guy who has everything down to a T. You know what I'm talking about.
We will camp at the exact coordinates that are listed on your itinerary. At 0700, we will wake up. At 0715, we will pack our gear. At 0730, we will begin hiking. At 1000, we will stop and drink approximately 1/2 liter of water. At 12 noon, we will stop at the precise coordinates and begin to eat lunch. At 12:15, we will continue our hike. At 13:25, we will reach the vista point where we will take no more or no less than 5 photographs. At 1600 hours, we will arrive at the campsite at the again designated coordinates. At 16:15, you will begin to set up your tent as the instructions say to do.
Are we gonna schedule in time for fun?
Dinner, and then you will construct a single s'mores and sing Kumbaya.
Oh, okay. Of course, then again, there is the other extreme. We also know that guy. Planning? You mean like making sure we have enough toilet paper? Who plans? Seriously. Best practice for planning exists somewhere kind of in the middle. Now, before all of you keyboard warriors get on there and start tearing me up, planning is an individual thing. As long as you make the minimum requirements to be safe out there, I really don't care how you do it, and you shouldn't really care how I do it. The reality is that we all do things a little bit differently. I just want to show a little bit of the tips that I use to kind of make sure that my trip goes the way that I want it to. Take them for what they are. All right, so now that I'm well caffeinated and have some of the goofiness out of the way, let's talk a little bit about what this series is, because it is going to be a series, and I'm going to do this over a series of videos. We're going to kind of talk about things in a chronological order. Things I want to talk about. One is early trip planning, which is what this video will cover, and that's going to talk about how to find where we're going to go, how to find who we want to hike with, and how we can best prepare for not only that trip, but throughout the season. The second video I want to talk about starts to delve into more of the specifics, dealing with special permit situations, special considerations, like, are there any considerations for hiking during a global pandemic? Never thought we would get to that point, but hey, here we are. And then of course talking about leave no trace principles. The third video will be probably the most important and often overlooked thing in trip planning, which is going to be an emergency plan. Hopefully something you'll never have to use, but something you want to have in your back pocket in case stuff does go bad. And then the last one is going to be the kind of planning that you do right before you hit the trail. So making sure all your gear's together, making sure you have a good food plan, that you have plenty of supplies and all those things. Stuff that would be done anywhere from a week up until about the beginning of the trailhead. So first off, obviously I want to talk about how to find out where we're going to go. All right, and there's a series of questions you might want to ask yourself, both at the time when you're trying to pick a place to go, because the answers to those questions can kind of help guide your search. But then also once you have selected a site, those same questions are going to be able to help you plan for the trip itself. So some of those questions are going to be like, what activities are available on the trail? What are some things you want to do? Are you looking to do some peak bagging? Are you looking for something just kind of a meander? Are there some side sites you want to visit, such as some lakes or some special features in the wild? Those are going to, again, be things that are going to help you decide what you want to do. What is the difficulty of the trail, and what are the trail conditions? Again, are you looking to do something strenuous? Are you looking to do something pretty laid back? Are you taking a new hiker out and you want them to be comfortable, so you're going to pick something easy? Those are going to be some things that are going to kind of help you in your search. But then also knowing what the trail conditions are once you do select a site, because that may change what your goals are as well as what your destination is. Length of the trip. How many days are you planning on going out? Is this going to be an overnighter, or are you looking to do a week-long trip and make a vacation of it? Are you looking to do a loop or an out and back? This can be pretty important. There aren't a lot of loop trips out here, so most of my trips out here tend to be either an out and back, and in some cases need to facilitate some sort of a shuttle. So there's some logistical concerns there. The cost of the trip. Is this local? Is it going to be something that you don't have to spend a lot of money for, or is it something you're going to have to travel to? How remote is the site that you're looking at? Are you looking to get someplace that's a little bit more remote because you have really good sets of skills and people going with you with a lot of knowledge? Or are you looking for something that's a little bit closer to home and you're not worried about how many people are around? The remoteness is also going to dictate what kind of questions you need to do for your emergency escape plan, because the more remote the site is, the harder it is going to be to have some sort of a bailout. Places to avoid. So are there anything that you don't want to do? Are you trying to avoid crowds? Are you trying to avoid tourists with cameras strapped around their necks? Those kind of things. And they decide whether you're going to do a trail that's in the front, more in the front area of, let's say, a national park, or in an area that's more remote. What kind of parking access does the site have? Is it going to be easy access? Do you need special vehicles? Do you got to call up your buddy who's got a four-wheel drive pickup and say, hey man, I need you to help us get out to this site? Again, things to consider. And last but not least, what is the water availability? Pretty self-explanatory. Do you need to bring extra items to carry more water because there's less opportunities to get water? Or are you going to be up in the Beartooth where you pass a stream every 15 minutes and you really only need one bottle? These are just some things you want to consider to help you, A, pick out where you want to go, and B, help plan that trip once you've made a decision. So easily, one of the hardest parts of planning a backpacking trip is figuring out where in the heck we're going to go. We're pretty fortunate here in the United States. There's a ton of places to go. Now, admittedly, that's going to be somewhat geographically concerning. So obviously, I lived in Ohio before I lived out here in Montana. In Ohio, there's a lot less opportunities and places to go than there are out here in Montana. I have a plethora of places that I can go at a relatively short notice. And so really what you have to decide is what kind of trip you want to go on. That's really gonna kind of boil down to what your preference is. You might want to pick a region that you might want to take a look at, or maybe it's a certain type of ecosystem that you want to go to. Say you want to go on a trip to the desert, you might look up where some areas that are really great for backpacking in the high desert are. Or if you want to go up into the mountains of a particular state, that's a great place to start. Or if you're just looking for some general suggestions, there are some tools that you can use to kind of narrow your ideas down. One of those tools is obviously going to be online forums, but it's not necessarily a bad idea to say, hey, I'm looking to go during this time period, on these many days, I'm looking for a loop trail or a straight out and back, and see what some people come up with. Another great source is to talk to your friends. Most of my backpacking trips are planned because somebody else wants to go to a place, or because it's some place that Jay, my hiking buddy, has gone because he's hiked everywhere and he's got really great suggestions. So don't discount your hiking buddy's input as well. Additionally, if you're a little bit more tech savvy, there are some apps out there that can really help you narrow down. Two of the ones that I use are All Trails, which has some really great options to it, and also the Hiker Project. Both of them have apps. The All Trails apps works best. I found though that the Hiker Project actually works best through the website. But these do have some really great options for them. Now you have to be a little bit concerned or cautious with these because most of the information is crowdsourced. So a lot of times you'll find stuff that you wouldn't ordinarily know about. Wouldn't necessarily trust all the GPS coordinates and information as far as that goes. But being a way to find that kind of spark of idea, it's a great opportunity for that. The other thing too is, not everything is going to be on these because they're crowdsourced. So some trails may get left behind, and sometimes those are going to be trails that maybe not a lot of people have been out to. Another thing you have to consider though is you're not the only person who uses those. So any trail that's been crowdsourced is probably going to have a higher likelihood of a higher population of people on the trail. If that's okay with you, great. If you're looking for something that's a little more solitude, you definitely want to consider that. Another thing to consider too is if you are going to go to a trail that's heavily trafficked, you do have to make sure that you pay a little bit more attention to your leave no trace ethics and make sure that you're not adding to what is probably already a heavy load for those places. One of the features that I really like about the hiking project is the opportunity to do a 3-dimensional flyover of the hike. It gives you kind of an idea of how the general topography is, although if you know how to read a map, that's probably a better option. However, it is kind of cool to be able to see, and for those nights where you're really struggling to get through and really wanting to go out, it can be kind of a nice little sidetrack to it. Another online and print source of information is also Backpacker Magazine. Again, you have to be aware that you are not the only person reading those, and so you might really like that, but there's a good likelihood if it just came out that there's going to probably be a little bit of a boost of people in there, so you may encounter more people on the trail than normally do. Again, if you use that, be kind to that site and that ecosystem, both in your practices on trail as well as your social media. You'll notice that I don't tag most of my trips, and I don't always necessarily mention where I'm at. And that's just to kind of help keep those areas a little less busy. And that's kind of a fine line, especially from somebody who's a YouTuber, because you want people to enjoy it, but you don't want them to enjoy it to death. So you have to find out what your norm or what your hopes are in that realm as well. And so whatever option you use to kind of get an idea generally where you want to go, once you've selected a site, that's when the really specific research starts to come into play. And again, this is something you can do to whatever level you feel comfortable with. I kind of enjoy this part. So for me, I like to learn about where I'm heading because there's some information out there that is going to not only decide how your trip might go, but is also going to fall into place as far as emergency preparedness and special permits and stuff like that. And this is where information such as hiking guides come into play. So hiking guides are going to give you a lot more in-depth look at kind of what the trail holds and what some of the requirements are as far as permits and special considerations. Of course, the other thing that is a good tool is going to be maps. Obviously, you have to be able to read a map in order to know what you're doing, but it's going to give you a general idea of how the trail progresses and some of the ups and downs. Now, one of the cautionary tales there is that it doesn't really paint a complete picture of what you're looking for. We ran into this on one of my trips where we thought we would have relatively flat open areas to find places to camp. It turns out it was completely covered with vegetation that we didn't know about, and it made things a little bit more difficult. Other really important sources of information on this are going to be things like what kind of weather can you find on this trail. That's going to help you decide the rough time period that you want to go. What are some water considerations? Is there more water during certain times of the year? What are the bugs like? Generally speaking, all this information is going to help you decide when is the best time to go for that trip. And once you have an idea of when you're going to go, it's really important, in my experience, to get that into the calendar and lock it in. Because one of the biggest problems that I have in getting actually on the trail is I will say, yeah, we're going to go out on this trip sometime around here. And yeah, but then maybe we'll go this weekend. Well, maybe we'll go this weekend. Maybe we'll go this weekend. And it never happens. There's just something about having it penciled in and locked into place that is going to be psychologically help you get to that point. You're going to make time for that. Also, you got to consider getting off of work, taking time off. I work in the outdoor industry, but I still have to schedule time off to get out into the backcountry. So again, these are information that the things are going to help you. And then you can find a lot of this information online, various weather apps, sources of information and stuff. And then of course, another really good source of information once they open, if they're seasonal, is going to be the agency that oversees the land itself. So if you're going to be hiking in a forestry district, it might not be a bad idea to shoot an email or make a phone call to the ranger district and say, hey, I'm thinking about this trip and I'm looking for some information on it. And they'll be able to guide you in it. Sometimes it can be an inconvenience to them, but generally speaking, my experience with most rangers and people who work in that industry would rather you take the time to ask those questions than ignore it and get yourself in trouble, and then they have to come out and get you. So of course, those are going to be some good sources of information as well. Plus, their websites often have information for hikers to be able to plan their trips. So another important aspect of a backpacking trip that you want to consider well in advance is what are the physical requirements of this trip? Is this going to be a strenuous hike? Is it going to be a moderate hike, or is it going to be a walk in the park? It's important that we be very honest with our abilities at the time that we're planning a trip. All too often, it's very easy to say, oh yeah, I totally can do that. And then you get out there and you really, really struggle. I've done that before myself. Part of the reason why I have taken more of a role in my fitness is to be able to do better trips without feeling as bad. So you do want to do a personal assessment. Is this going to be an early trip? Because if it's an early trip in the season, you kind of want to ease into it. You don't necessarily want to tackle a mountain peak right out of the chute, because if it's been a long, hard winter, you may not be up for that challenge. But then again, maybe you spent the entire summer working out and you are up to the challenge. It's just important to know what your limitations are going to be. Not only what are your limitations going to be, but what are the limitations going to be of the people you're going on the trip with? What is their physical ability? It's really hard. We don't want to necessarily exclude anyone on a trip, but if you know that that person has something that's going to cause them to not be able to participate in, say, a more strenuous activity that you want to do, maybe suggest going on a different trip, or just generally, find a sensitive way to break it to them. But it's important to know our limitations as well as the limitations of the people on our team, because we don't want to necessarily make somebody else have a miserable experience by pulling them along on something that's way above their ability. And then the other thing too is going to be getting ready for that trip. There's definitely a lot of different ways that you can plan to approach a trip in the future and get yourself in shape if you maybe have kind of slipped and enjoyed a few too many pizzas along the way. One of the resources that I use is a little book from Backpacker Magazine, Fitness and Nutrition for Hiking. This is a really great little book and gives some really good exercises that I use throughout the year to continue to keep my muscles ready for the trip, as well as my stamina. And then of course their website does have a lot of information. So Backpacker Magazine is actually a really great source for some fitness goal related training for a trip. And of course, the easiest way to prepare for a backpacking trip is just to walk. That's really all what backpacking is. It's walking with weight on our backs. So oftentimes what I'll do is I'll just go for a walk in my neighborhood, just a regular walk, and build myself up. And then eventually I may put some weight into a pack and hike that way. You can certainly use all of your gear and just take it out, but that can be a little bit rough on the gear, if you're doing it on a regular basis. So what I actually did was I took a stuff sack and filled it with about 20 pounds of, I think, dried pinto beans, and it doesn't matter. And this way I just slide this into my pack and go for a few mile walk. And the more that you hike with weight, the less your impact it's going to have when you finally do get out there and throw that pack on. Lastly, it's important to make sure that our gear is up to snuff. I'm not talking like you have to go through and count every single thing of lip balm that you have and make sure you have enough. But we do want to, generally speaking, make sure that our gear is ready to go. If you've got new gear, you want to make sure you know how to use it. One of the biggest pitfalls that we run into, especially if we've been doing this for a while, is you think, I've set up a tent before. I know how to set up a tent. I don't need to do it ahead of time. I work in the outdoor industry. We get new tents in all the time. We have to set them up in the store. I can tell you from experience, I don't always know how to set them up. So make sure you're familiar with the gear. You don't want to become familiar with the gear in the middle of a driving rainstorm on top of a mountain. The other thing you want to do is check to make sure that all your gear is in good working order. Now, prior to this video, I thought, well, I should probably follow my own advice and actually check out my gear. And I'm glad I did, because as I was checking out my tent, my Big Agnes Fly Creek, I found that there was a tear in the mesh, most likely from my trip last year to the Crazy Mountains when we had that big windstorm. It probably tore during that. It's in an area that's really high tension, and so I knew that I couldn't repair it myself without it becoming damaged again further. So, because my season isn't going to start for a while, I had plenty of time to send it into Big Agnes. So currently my tent is in Colorado being repaired. I love that company and the fact that you're able to do those repairs. But you definitely want to give yourself a lot of lead time to make sure that your repairs are done before you want to head out. But, a good idea to check your pack, your tent, maybe your sleeping gear. Make sure there's no punctures in your pad. Make sure your stove is working. If you're one of those guys that likes to make silly videos of your hut trips, you may want to check to make sure all of your recording equipment is working and everything. Just generally good idea to know where you sit at ahead of time so that you don't have any last minute gear surprises. And you would be amazed how many people do. I work at a shop. If you want to see how it is, come to a shop on a Friday and see how many people come in last minute needing stuff. And we don't always have it. It isn't always available. And it would really suck to have to cancel a trip because something wasn't working and they didn't have a replacement part or something for it. So a little bit of prevention can go a really long way for making your trip work.